Hi, I'm Virisilam Bondromo. I'm one of the co-leads at the Urgent Action Fund Asia and the Pacific. We're a rapid response grant maker supporting women and non-binary human rights defenders in Asia and the Pacific. The impact of COVID on women and non-binary human rights defenders or activists, both in Asia and the Pacific, has been huge, like it has been in the rest of the world. And the reason being is because the pandemic has purely just amplified or exacerbated the inequalities that currently exist. So the inequalities that are experienced by women, say, around violence, which is an impact of inequality, is violence. So there's been an increase in violence. When you look at the people who are at the forefront of addressing COVID-19, for whether they're essential workers like health workers, or whether they are women who are, or people who are working in essential services like supermarkets, they're mainly women. So they are also impacted by the virus themselves. Therefore, there's also high infection rates, and in some cases, deaths in a lot of countries. And this impact, I think, has a far-reaching impact rather than just the present, but I can see it extending past the pandemic itself, is the economic impact that it has on women. A lot of the sectors, which is dominated by women and non-binary sectors, many of them are in informal sectors that have very poor to no social security, don't exist. So a lot of these women and non-binary human rights defenders currently have no economic security. So in terms of what we, Urgent Action Fund, are doing at the moment to support activists, both women and non-binary defenders, is we created a grant specifically for these communities, because we are seeing that these communities are not accessing or have no access to government subsidies or government support. They're for some reason falling through the cracks, purely for their identity or the kind of work that they do, or they live in areas that have absolutely no access to government support. So our grants have been able to support from economics, support them economic security and livelihood, to medicines, to shelter. So these are some of the things that we've been able to support. To date, like we opened up our grant in April the 6th, till now we've given out already about $130,000 US dollars has already gone to supporting specifically COVID grants, but also the impact of COVID. Because the other impact is a lot of the defenders are getting surveillanced, and a lot of their human rights are being limited, and they're using the pandemic to do that. So we're doing a lot of security and well-being grants too. Some of the amazing things that we're seeing with our COVID grants is that activists are not just responding to their most immediate needs, which is just about survival. And for a lot of these activists, the act of survival is actually resistance in itself, and that's a political act. And I think that's pretty amazing. But they're also doing, taking the grant and investing in things. So for example, like community gardens, which are focused on growing plants and food indigenous to that community, because they're seeing this as an opportunity to be able to start and focus on food sovereignty. And I think that this idea of looking at new ways of working that's not only centered on people, planet, and other beings, but the interdependence of that is, for me, like a new way of working. And it's a new way of creating new systems. And that's what this pandemic is saying. It's like Arundhati Roy basically said, that the pandemic is a portal by which we can take forward new ideas and leave behind ideas that don't support people, planet, and other beings. And I think that a lot of activists on the ground now are seeing this as an opportunity and using the grants that we've given them to be able to recreate new ways of engaging and being. Women's funds have a really important role to play during this pandemic. I think that the role that we have is important because we're directly connected to women's movements, non-binary movements, both in Asia and the Pacific. That connection is based on the fact that there is a trust and connectedness between us, because we're listening to what the community wants, and based on what their immediate and strategic needs are. Our role is to mobilize those resources to ensure that they have the resources to be able to do the work that they need to do today and the visioning that they need to do tomorrow.